We're going to look at 3 whole chapters today. We've done this the last few weeks where we've looked at some big chunks of the book of Ezekiel, mostly because they come in big groupings like this. And there's 3 chapters that go together, and we're not going to read all 3 chapters, but I do invite you to turn to them and look at them. We're going to hit the waters today, basically. If you know anything about the Jewish people, the people of Israel, they hated going out on the water. They weren't good sailors. I mean, the most famous sailor in the Old Testament, of course, is Jonah. They weren't good at it. But they had some neighbors who were. The Jews looked at the waters as a place of fear, as a place with strange creatures, a place of death. They even considered it a place where evil resided. But they had some neighbors to the north. There were 2 twin cities in what is today Lebanon. Tyre was the bigger of the 2, and it had a little brother by the name of Sidon. Now Tyre is still a foreign city today. In fact, this is Tyre, Lebanon today. Actually doesn't look like that bad of a place. You probably can't see it, but actually one of the buildings in the middle there is a KFC. That's what it says. So there you go. They even have chicken there. Greasy fried chicken. Anyways, it looks pretty. There's another shot of the harbor of Tyre, an important modern city in the nation of Lebanon. For a nation that's being war-torn as Lebanon, it doesn't look that bad. Tyre was a naval city, and it was famous for its ships sailing throughout the Mediterranean. They sent off traders and colonists all over the Mediterranean region. Israel, they stayed on the land. Nice, safe earth. But Tyre, the Phoenicians, they loved to head out on the water. 2 neighboring countries with 2 very different outlooks of what they did in life. This was a low time when we come to Ezekiel for the nation of Israel. Some among the people thought that God had completely and utterly abandoned them. Some others thought that perhaps their God was weak and was unable to protect them during difficult moments. Jerusalem, the beginning of Ezekiel, had been invaded. Its main citizens, including the prophet Ezekiel, had been dragged off to the nation of Babylon. And they're asking the question, where do we go from here? And then just when we get to this passage of Ezekiel 26, those who were left behind in Jerusalem and were forced to pay tribute to the Babylonian king and decided they had had enough of it, they rebel against Babylon, and they don't stand a chance. Babylon sweeps in a second time, and this time completely levels the city. Every building ripped down, walls torn down, brought down to its foundation. And for Ezekiel, that's horrible news, but it gets worse. About this same time, in fact, scholars believe the same day that Jerusalem was attacked, Ezekiel's wife dies, and he is left alone. It's a very difficult time. Everything is going wrong, and they're looking for a pathway out. The beginning of Ezekiel, God appears to the prophet in a grand and great majestic vision to show how powerful he is. And he comes to the people and says, don't blame others for your problems. Own up. Take responsibility for what has gone wrong. And then acknowledge that you cannot do it on your own. Look to Jesus. A big part of Ezekiel is spent denouncing a lot of nations around him. Last week we talked about the pronouncements against the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. Very interesting little passage. Now we're going to come to another one. And this week Ezekiel denounces the Phoenician cities of Tyre and Sidon. Not only Tyre, but he gets to Sidon a little bit at the end. And they're interesting prophecies about these seagoing sailors and the reminder that the sea is always unpredictable and you never know what you get when you head out to sea. There's a story of a sailor who was trying to sneak back to his ship at about 3 o'clock in the morning and was spotted by a chief petty officer who ordered him to explain his tardiness. The lame explanations did not work, and the chief looked at him and says, "Take this broom, and I want you to sweep every link on the anchor chain by morning, or it's the brig for you." Well, the sailor began to sweep, but a small tern, which is a small bird, landed on the broom handle, and he couldn't continue. He yelled at the bird, but it wouldn't budge. Finally plucked it off. He actually grabbed this small bird off the broom and tossed it away and got one link swept, and the tern returned and landed back on his broom handle. He had to repeat this. And he repeated it over and over again throughout the night. He would toss the bird and sweep, and the bird would come back. When morning came, the chief was back as well. "What have you been doing all night? This chain is no cleaner than when you started." "Honest, chief," said the sailor, "I tossed a tern all night and couldn't sweep a link." Okay, that's nothing to do with the passage, but it's about the same. Chapter 26 of Ezekiel. Follow along. I'm not going to read the whole things, but I'm going to bring a couple of thoughts. Verse 4. "They shall destroy the walls of Tyre and break down her towers. And I will scrape her soil from her and make her a bare rock." Ironic, because Tyre, this word Tyre means rock. Turns out that this fancy rock that was a place of success is going to be turned into a bare rock. Now, this whole passage is, in fact, is kind of odd. You see, this is Ezekiel calling down curses on the city of Tyre, and Tyre wasn't exactly Israel's enemy. In fact, for most of their history, they got along pretty well. They were neighbors. We don't find many wars between the two. When Babylon swept in the first time and attacked Israel, there was a little bit of an aberration where they looked at this giant Babylonian army coming and they said, "You're going to let us pass through to Israel or else." And Tyre said, "Okay." And I kind of get it. And then they provided them with supplies along the way, and they allowed them to go through their territory. But they weren't really enemies. They got along pretty good. But as we go through Ezekiel 26, and we're not going to read it all, it talks about your walls will shake from thundering enemies. Your mighty pillars will fall to the ground. We're going to knock your buildings right into the water. There's going to be lots of room on this rock to spread out fishing nets because the whole city's going to be wiped out. Not very happy. Then everyone will gather together, and most of these 3 chapters are a funeral lament. And here's part of the first one. "How you have perished, you who were inhabited from the seas. O city renowned, who is mighty on the sea. She and her inhabitants opposed their terror on all her inhabitants." It's kind of nasty. It's going to go on. "The waters will cover you, and you go down to the pit. Those who had the gall to go out to the sea will actually drown there." Kind of the idea, if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. Except the opposite has to do with water. You're going to go out in the water, you're going to drown. You think you mastered the sea, the place of terror. The place where they actually believed the devil might reside. But instead, it masters you. You will go down to the grave. He concludes, "I will bring you to a dreadful end, and you shall be no more. Though you be sought for, you will never be found again, declares the Lord God." Some interesting ideas in all this. A few years go by before Babylon indeed does turn against Tyre. They head out, and in 586, Nebuchadnezzar arrives at the shore before Tyre. Now, Tyre was predominantly an island. I say predominantly. There was a portion of the city that was on the mainland, with the farms around it, but then there was a separation of water. And Tyre sat on an island just off the coast. And it was protected. They kind of looked at Nebuchadnezzar and they stuck their tongue out at him and said, good luck getting to us. We have big ships. You might wipe out our farmlands here, but we can get to farms all over the Mediterranean. We can bring out food. And for 10 years, Nebuchadnezzar's army sat across the channel and looked across and tried to figure out how they were going to get to them, and they never did. And after 10 years, they finally formed some sort of peace agreement to which Tyre agreed that they would pay tribute to Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuchadnezzar never really destroyed them. 2.5 centuries pass. All the big empires in the Middle East change. And now the big kid on the block is Alexander the Great, the Macedonian Greek emperor. Tyre had many connections with the Greeks over the years. And Alexander comes down, and he comes around, and once again arrives at the shores of Tyre, and they all stick their tongues out at him. And Alexander has a clever little ploy. He starts throwing rocks at him. Now, he can't really hit him with rocks because they're across the water. But he starts throwing a lot more rocks, and more rocks until eventually he creates a bridge. And Alexander goes across and gets over to Tyre, but he doesn't destroy it. It's way too valuable a harbor. It's way too valuable a city. He goes in and he tells them, you're going to behave yourselves and you're going to become a Greek city. You're going to listen to me. But he doesn't destroy them. Time passes. The Romans come. The Islamic armies come. All sorts of people come. Tyre's still an important city. Prophecy is an interesting thing. It is a pronouncement of God, revealing something of God's own self and His will to humanity. Sometimes we'll just hear it's about future predictions. But it is actually a statement for God in which time can be irrelevant because it's spoken from somebody who's outside of time, who is in the realm of eternity. And prophecy sometimes needs to be read differently than, say, history, because it's not looking at it from a point of view of a human. If we read some of the prophecies about Jesus, oftentimes it's talking about the first coming of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus all at the same time. The prophet may not have understood that there would be thousands of years between parts of his predictions, but there often are. The point of prophecy is not to help us to understand history. It is to get our attention and point us toward the eternal God. It is to help us see the world from God's perspective. And it gives us a glimpse of what God is doing and what God is going to do. Through that, we commit ourselves to God all the greater because we know He is at work. The prophecy about the destruction of Tyre is fulfilled in multiple historical ways. They were attacked. They were beat down. But there's an eternal end to this as well. We're going to understand that a little bit better as we get to the later parts of this sermon, particularly as we get to chapter 28. This is not just talking about a historical downfall of the city of Tyre. There's something bigger spiritually at work. There is a point where these material, powerful people will be destroyed. They will be brought down by their pride. But there's also a spiritual dimension at work. Chapter 27 is a funeral song then written to Tyre. And in the middle, all of a sudden, there's a eulogy that breaks out. But God is going to destroy these people. So Ezekiel gets up in front of the people of Israel and does a mock funeral for them. Tyre, arrogant, wealthy. Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty. Your borders are in the heart of the seas. Your builders made perfect your beauty. is there. That's a problem. They have too much stuff. The power of Tyre is going to be broken because they think they're rich enough. They think they're smart enough, but they are broken. A long list is given in the middle of this chapter about all the wealth of Tyre. Is it going to help them? Wealth does not save. Wealth does not bring about power. They've mastered the sea. They think they've mastered their world, but they have not. Verses 26 and 27 of this chapter. Your rowers have brought you out into the high seas. The east wind has wrecked you in the heart of the seas. Your riches, your wares, your mariners, and your pilots, with all your crew that is in your midst, sink into the heart of the seas on the day of your fall. The place that was fear for Jews, but was safety for Tyre, will prove to be their downfall. Ships so laden with loot that it sinks their ships. Certainly reminds you of Western civilization today, doesn't it? Where we think we've mastered our world, and yet perhaps it is our greatest strengths that may be our downfall. Where we think we are in control, we are not. But God has our destinies in His hands. There's a story of Vladimir Nabokov. He was a Russian-born American writer, kind of the middle part of the 20th century, who was a single-minded individual. And he had a lot of hobbies. In fact, one of his hobbies was he loved to collect butterflies. And he went out and he stayed in a ranch in Utah to collect butterflies once in the late 1940s. He was so determined he was going to get this one butterfly that he spent a whole day pursuing it, chasing it down, and occasionally thought he caught sight of it, and he kept single-mindedly going after it. And finally caught it, and he went back to the ranch, and he said he was all excited about this butterfly that he caught. And then he mentioned to the owner of the ranch, oh, by the way, at one point, midway through my day of chasing the butterfly, I heard the groans and cries of a person who sounded injured in a ditch back there. You may want to go check on him. He said, you didn't go look? Well, no, I had my butterfly to catch. The owner of the ranch went back to this little gulch and looked, and sure enough, there was a prospector lying dead in the ditch. Nabokov saved him? Who knows? But you know what? Sometimes we're so busy chasing wealth and power, we miss what we really need. These folks in Tyre were super wealthy, but they cared not one bit about those around them suffering. Back in Jerusalem, they'd been wiped out by the Babylonians. They were starving. They were in poverty. They were suffering and they were struggling, and Tyre was only concerned with making more money. This prophecy is about an arrogant, wealthy people who do not care about others and instead are consumed with their own selfish agenda. Tyre looks powerful, but cares not one whit about others, and so is defeated. One more chapter, it's another funeral lament. This one's not to the city itself, but to the king of Tyre, a man by the name of Ido-Baal. That's a great name, isn't it? Ido-Baal. It's actually Ido-Baal II. I want to real quickly, I'm going to put up a bunch of verses. I may not read them all in whole, but look at these. Because your heart is proud and you said, I am a god, I sit on the seat of gods in the heart of the seas. Right away, no. Tyre, they didn't worship their kings. It's not like Egypt and some other places. But here he's like God. He's independent. He wants to be God and take God's place. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. And the beginning of creation was beautiful. That day you were created, they were prepared. You are anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You are on the holy mountain of God. You are a special creation meant to be a guardian of creation. A cherub is a guardian in particular of what is holy. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. Really odd. You were not initially in sin, but you fell into it. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. The word violence here might be better translated exploitation. Exploitation. You joined with God's given work, but you used it to your own advantage. So I brought fire out from your midst. It consumed you. And I turned you to ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. Not born in sin, but became the biggest sinner. Known for fire and ashes, and has a horrible reputation. And finally, all who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You've come to a dreadful end and shall be no more forever. And what's interesting, I read this. Remembering prophecy as a description from God's point of view. Humanity was created in the image of God. We still find some of the beauty of God within creation, but it's been corrupted and twisted by sin. And I read this, and I'm not seeing a king who was born in the image of God, but has been twisted by sin. I'm seeing somebody else described here. And while he's talking about this king, Idobal, he's really talking about the king behind. The one who has the power behind the arrogance of Tyre. He's talking about Satan. And really, this is a prophecy about Satan. I think it's very clear who's being described. Who else is powerful and strong and arrogant and cares nothing about those who are suffering? The corruption of humanity often shows some of what has corrupted Satan. But Satan is worse. And the power and wealth and greed that connect us to Satan are played out all the more in his person. Arrogance, pride, lack of a need for God, reliance on self, those are the characteristics of the enemy. The power that keeps him in play. And he's using Tyre, its characteristics, and its fate to describe Satan. As I look through this, I can find some very real lessons about Satan in these chapters. Like Tyre, number one, Satan is not the cause of all our problems. He is a problem, but not the cause of our sin. He wants to be God, but he is not as powerful. And so, even though he may have the desire to be God-like, it is our fault still if we are deceived by him. We can never say, the devil made me do it. Secondly, Satan is interested in wealth and power for us because it removes us from God. It takes our focus off of him. He doesn't care if we're suffering. He doesn't care if we're well off. He just doesn't want us worshiping God. Third, Satan can appear powerful. But fourthly, Satan has no real power. 5, Satan's fate is absolute and he is doomed. 6, Satan works towards things for his own advantage only. But most important of all is the final point I get out of this, that God is in control. I've had a lot of conversations with people in recent months about Satan. Several of you are here. And I read these chapters, and a lot of these things that strike me about Satan. And they're important to learn. Satan is dangerous. But we're not to spend our life fearing him. I was reading that there's a snake that has no real venom, but if you attack it, the first thing it does is try to act like a venomous snake. And if whatever's attacking it is not fooled, it'll do a second thing, and that is it'll play dead. It'll go all of a sudden from hissing and trying to bite you to playing dead and just lying there like it's got no life in it. And that reminds me a lot of Satan. Satan loves to be feared, but he's satisfied with being ignored. We need to know there is an enemy, but we need to not live in fear of him because we need to live in fear of God. Because God is much more powerful. Why is this important? Because Satan has been defeated. He has no real power, but boy, he can look like he does. And his ways are very powerful from our point of view. The world today, under the influence of Satan, is seeing the church as old-fashioned, not modern, simple. We just educate people enough, religion will go away. Humanity mimicking Satan. We don't need God. We're powerful enough on our own. And we can feel like we're besieged and under pressure. For generations now, theologians have given this illustration. Imagine a city with walls around it, but around the walls is an attacking army. And this army has cut off all supplies coming into the city. Nobody can get in or out. They are on the brink of starvation. They are on the brink of saying we need to surrender. Throw ourselves at the mercy of the opposing army so that we may survive. The citizens are in fear. But in the dark of night, a brave spy somehow manages to sneak through enemy lines and get into the city. And he brings word that the main forces of the enemy have been defeated. The enemy king has been killed. And word has not come out to the soldiers around your city yet that they are defeated. But the word is coming soon that they are to surrender. Don't give in. Don't give up hope, because victory has already been won. Similarly, at times we may now seem that we are surrounded by the forces of evil. The results of sin, disease, injustice, oppression, death are all around us, but the enemy has already been defeated. Things are not the way they seem to be. It is only a matter of time before it becomes clear that the battle is over. And then we will all understand things from God's point of view. Ezekiel gives these 3 chapters about Tyre to tell us that God is not defeated. From his point of view, the enemy is already defeated. God is not impotent. God is not disinterested. He is won. And a dangerous enemy has already been defeated. Satan has been crushed. Romans 16, we're told the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. That's our hope. I'm going to invite our worship team to come forward, because we don't want to be drawn to the enemy. We don't want to be drawn to things that are evil. Because as soon as our eyes are always on evil and what Satan is doing, our eyes are off Jesus. So let's draw nearer to Jesus.